Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the state of Gen 9 OU and the future of Gen 9 OU tiering. We've got a very special guest today, one of the most decorated Smogon veterans of all time, head of the OU Council, CEO of Big Stall, and symbolic punching bag of uninformed players, Finchinator. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to join you. It's so cool seeing what you got going, and I'm just happy to play my part.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to talk with such an experienced veteran. Before we get into the questions about Gen 9, I want to clarify a major misconception I see happening all the time. So, over the years, the OU Council has quick banned and suspect tested many Pokemon, typically powerful breakers and sweepers, rather than incredibly bulky walls. This isn't always the case, like we saw Mega Sableye ban in Gen 6, but generally sweepers and offensive Pokemon are far more likely to face the ban hammer. This has created the idea that the OU Council, and by extension yourself, love Stall or want to see Stall succeed. So, Finchinator, for all the people that think your room is filled with hundreds of posters of Blissey and Toxapex, could you explain why it is that more offensive Pokemon are targeted for bans?
Sure. And first off, you did blow my cover. My room may or may not have all that festivities going on, but so it's interesting because the correlation drawn between banning offensive Pokemon and stall, in my opinion, is not a real one or a true one. So let's take some examples from this generation. Let's say Roaring Moon or Chen Pao, two of the prominent dark type mythical Pokemon that got banned for being too strong. These Pokemon actually were really well handled by stall teams, thanks to defensive behemoth like Skarmory nowadays, or going back, Dondozo has been a constant in the equation, and so
Mm-hmm.
on and so forth. And they've been suspected and ultimately banned. And the fact of the matter is that these Pokemon, these overly fragile Pokemon that hit so hard, they're actually really good into balance teams because balance teams can't afford to fit passive Pokemon. And they can't fit a Clodsire, a Dondozo too often. They can't fit a Blissey. They need to be proactive. So balance, bulky offense, even opposing offense, they really struggled, but Stall is actually pretty good into them.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do with these suspects is make it so that every single style is viable. We want to see offense, hyper offense, rain, all that. But we also want to be able to see, stall, yes, but also balance and bulky offense and even semi-stall, the whole spectrum, if you will. And being able to do that without using the same exact Pokemon on every single team, because you want to counter the Chen Pao, you want to counter the Roaring Moon, is so important. So in a sense, I view a lot of these suspects and bans as addition by subtraction. In that, yeah, you're removing one Pokemon, so you are subtracting, but you're actually adding to the metagame because now there are going to be new Pokemon you could use. You don't have to use Dondozo on every team to check the really strong physical sweeper. You don't have to use Clodsire on every team with Terra Dark for Spathra, and so on and so forth. With Reggie Lecky in the metagame, Reggie Leaky, not sure how to pronounce it. I apologize. You don't have to use Clodsire or Blissey on every team, and it goes on for each ban, each suspect, but ultimately, I actually think most bans remove one Pokemon but make it so that 3 or 5 or 10 more Pokemon are viable now that they're not unable to be used in certain cores and configurations. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I think that makes it so that balance and bulky offense, the most widely encompassing styles, can now kind of thrive and work more. And we've seen that. We've seen a boom in balance later in the DLC 1 and home metagames. And that's no coincidence because we've gotten kind of all the craziness out. DLC 2, we're still working towards that point, but I'm definitely excited with our trajectory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. You make a lot of good points. As a team builder, I can absolutely confirm the truth of what you're saying. I mean, every time a broken sweeper gets banned, it's a lot easier to make a balance team, and you can fit breakers onto that balance team. And stall usually suffers with that. So I'd say actually when you have all the crazies in the tiers, when stall is at its peak and kind of dwindles, the more stable and balanced the metagame gets. Like Hoopa U right now is in, I think, like RU or something. You never see it. And, because you just can't support a Hoopa U with all the insane sweepers that are running around the tier. Hoopa U is just too slow, too frail, doesn't have enough defensive utility to put it onto a team. But maybe, we get some bans in there. Suddenly you can afford to run a Hoopa U, and I can tell you, Stall will not be happy to see that. So yeah, definitely from a building perspective, I can say that that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also, yeah, power creep is crazy. What we're seeing, I mean, you say Hoopa use are you? I'm saying things like things like Espathra and Chen Pao and Roaring Moon, have at points been regular OU Pokemon despite how crazy they could snowball into. And I just think that's
Hmm.
more of a Generation 9 moment. And, unfortunately, every generation is going to be different. You can play Pokemon so many different ways, but no matter how you do it in Gen 9, it's always going to be strong.
Yeah, and actually, the topic of power creep is a really good segue into our next topic. Tiering action has gotten a lot more aggressive in recent years, a lot more quick bans, and a lot more suspect tests than before, and just, I think, a record breaking number of OU bans. A lot of people have been upset by this. Why have there been so many bans and quick bans this generation?
All right, so that's a great question. And first off, I want to preface this by saying there isn't actually a quota. 10 bands isn't always better than having 12 bands, or 15 bands isn't always better than having 20 bands, and so on and so forth. There's not actually a quota, but as a general premise, we like it to have OU be as balanced as possible with as few bands as possible. But balance is mentioned first in that sentence because that's the first and foremost priority. So if it takes more bands to get to a more balanced point, then that's okay.
Hmm.
But then you're asking the question, okay, but we've had less bands to make balance points in other generations and other metagames. So why is it taking more this generation? And I think there's two primary factors. One of them, of course, being Terra remaining in the metagame. Like it or not, it is very more likely than not here to stay.
Hmm.
And given that, and all that comes with that, there is a bit more of a dynamic offensive profile and defensive profile that certain things can have. I mean, looking at some of the bands, we used Roaring Moon before. It being able to terrestrialize fly and suddenly doing crazy damage with initially non-stab acrobatics on top of its already good coverage isn't something we'd ever see in another generation. And you could
Hmm.
apply this to plenty of Pokemon that are also Ubers now, or even Pokemon in OU. And that makes it so that counterplay is not always as simple and team building gets much harder. And in my opinion, there's a lot of skill to it, and there's give and take, and it rewards the most informed players. But
Hmm.
at the same time, there definitely is an emphasis on trying to cut down things that are cheap and have more guesswork, and maybe force you to use, very limited team structures. Parlaying, that point into another, segueing that point to another, is the fact that power creep is at an all-time high. And while Terra definitely, artificially makes it seem like, things are already as strong as can be, truth be told, we're seeing higher attack stats. We're seeing more boosting opportunities. We're seeing things like booster energy, all sorts of different things, and also greater means of entry, thanks to things like heavy duty boots carried over from last generation, and the things like chilly reception off Slow King Galar, pivoting into certain things. And
Hmm.
all in all, we get to a point where we're finding Pokemon as strong as ever, with more openings than ever, with a greater array of possible broken things to do than ever. And I find that to be really worrisome. And because of that, there are a lot of Pokemon that I want to keep that I can't necessarily keep. I think Chen Pao is a great example. It's a really cool Pokemon. It's actually one of my favorite Pokemon in the game. But when you got something with 400 speed, doing 400 damage every turn,
Yeah.
and then able to even break through like the Skarmories and Corviknights of the world if you Terra Dark or you get a defense drop, and it's like, oh, well, maybe we have to look back into that. And also, it just feels like every Pokemon in the world gets like Swords Dance or Quiver Dance nowadays.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
it
they really did hand that out, didn't they?
not a walk in the park.
Yeah, and there's also the factor of DLCs, which I think might be that another big factor with this kind of tiering action,
Sure.
right? Like you need to reach a stable metagame faster than you did in the past. We
Yeah.
don't have as much time in between games, so we can't drag our feet and wait 6 months to see if Volcarona is a problem.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we used to have every single Pokemon in the Pokedex day one, and we had the full three, or going back a couple generations, 4 years, and it was like, okay, let's knock this out one step at a time. And I still do like the one step at a time approach, but suddenly, we had 4 months or 3 months between DLCs, or 6 months before home at the start of the generation. Suddenly, you're condensing that, and you want people to have a playable metagame for ladder tournaments and the wide array of other things. So yeah, you're gonna have more consecutive suspects and surveys. But now we're at a point where we're a little under a year and a half into generations, a little under halfway through how we expect the generation to be, and fortunately, we are at a point where we're at a point where hopefully we can kind of take our time, let the metagame settle, and then react in a more normal fashion. But that wasn't always something that was granted to us, and I'll be the first to admit that I don't think myself or the council have been perfect this generation because we've
Hmm.
had so many new circumstances to adapt to. Sometimes we have to make judgments on the fly, be it when we're learning new information about releases or within the first week or two of a metagame, and that's quite all right. Sometimes, we don't want to react too quickly, and maybe we act a little conservatively. There's two ways to it. Things like the Volcarona quick ban, the optics weren't great on it, and maybe it looks a little regrettable in hindsight. But then there are other times we act aggressively, like banning Arena Trap at start of generation or getting Scale Shot back Excalibur out of the tier quickly. In my opinion,
Hmm.
those things were really good and they let metagames develop quicker. So there's give and take. Some things age well, some things don't age well. The fact of the matter is that having a choppy DLC and home infested, tiering system is never going to be clean. So we're
Hmm.
just going to do our best, and sometimes it'll work out, sometimes not so much.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And on behalf on behalf of all team builders, I'm very very grateful for that Baxcalibur ban. I tell you, whew, that was a big relief at
I'm
the
with
time.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about kind of what a healthy metagame is and what your goal is that you're trying to get to. So this next question is kind of about what is a healthy metagame, and that has been brought into question a bit this generation. Many people dislike Generation 9 for the inherent chaos caused by Terra, particularly with setup sweepers, things like Gouging Fire, Roaring Moon, Volcarona. Like if you look at Roaring Moon, there's almost no Pokemon that can really answer it. I mean, you've got Iron Defense Skarmory, which can be beaten by Terra Flying Taunt or Terra Ghost. Yeah, you've got things like Air Balloon Kingambit that can get Brick Breaked. Volcarona, of course, with a variety of Terra types, can Quiver Dance up and do all kinds of nonsense. And these threats can ruin almost any team if they have the right move. Others have really liked this and the kind of the chaotic nature and are really happy with Gen 9 being a generation where sweepers flourish and there are a lot more set variation and a game is never truly over as long as Terra is an option. And with the recent votes on of do not ban on Curum and Gouging Fire, it seems like perhaps this more chaos embracing, let Gen 9 be a crazy power creep mess group is almost gaining popularity. So where do you personally stand on this? What do you consider to be a healthy metagame, and what is future tiering action what direction is that going to try to take the metagame in?
It's a great question, and I'll give you an honest answer. First and foremost, two recent suspects not resulting in bans happened. And maybe that's not the most common, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's the fact that we are trying to steer a ship straight, but the waters the ship is in, are a little turbulent. Sometimes we're going a little to the left, a little to the right. The fact of the matter is, the metagame right now is as choppy, as volatile as we've seen a little bit. And that's not the most fun for players, builders, etc. But we're gonna see Gouging Fire look really broken when a new set like Breaking Swipes comes out, and then a week
Mm-hmm.
or two is gonna pass, and it's gonna be adapted to, or maybe not fully adapted to, but at least considered more in team building.
Mm-hmm.
And part of suspect considerations normally end up with suspect is determined by the metagame at the start date, but they're decided by the metagame at the end date. And that's two different things. We're at point A and point B, where there's a lot more going in between A and B than normal. So right now, my main message to everyone is let's not panic about the not bans, and let's just maybe even be a little patient. Exercise some caution. We've been in points like this in prior generations, and um, segueing to the balance part, prior generations have oftentimes ended or at least had points of balance. In my opinion, Generation 8, very balanced metagame. You could find it boring if you'd like, but it did end in a pretty competitive place.
Mm-hmm.
Generation 6, I felt similarly about, and then the last couple years after it's already been a little generation, it's shifted around a lot, but neither here nor there. Generation 9 is going to get there as well. I have no doubt in my mind. Maybe it'll be a bit more of a chaotic version of balanced because of Terra, because of the influx of threats and power creep, and that's all right. But we'll get there, and we are getting there as we speak. But what
Mm-hmm.
does that balanced metagame mean? Two things. First off, I think it means every single play style, major play style, has to be viable. Offense, balance, bulky teams should all be usable to some degree. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
bulky teams are a little more limited in some generations, or offense a little more limited in others. It really depends. But
Yeah.
ultimately, you want some kind of outline, some way of mixing it up. You don't want every game to be the same exact thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there should be some centralization because, in my opinion, centralization is healthy. If Great Tusk sees 35% in usage all generation, that's fine. Better than it seeing 95%. And I don't think usage necessarily is a bad thing.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
and another thing would be that I want not only every playstyle to be viable, but I want there to be different options. I don't want us to have to use Slow King Galar on every single team because of Kurum and Anamoris. Or I don't want us to have to use, um, let's say Terra Fairy ground types on every single team for Breaking Strike, Housing Fire. I don't want us to have to use, I mean, you could insert a host of other things.
Yeah.
Let's say Gliscor. I don't want us to be using Gliscor a ton because status switch-ins are too limited. I basically want to get to a point where there are fewer crutches in team building and there's a more diversity. Innovation can thrive rather than be stifled. And that's never going to be perfect. There are going to be times when there's only so many Pokemon that can fulfill X role. There's only going to be so many Steel types, or there's only going to be so many Hazard control forms. There's only going to be so many Hazard setters. Stuff like that. I get it, and that's just playing the hand that Game Freak deals us every generation. So there are limits to what we can do, and maybe a metagame's peak in one generation could be a 10 out of 10, another could be an 8 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. That's perfectly fine with me. But my goal is to come close to, if not hit, whatever that peak is, and I believe we will get there. And I believe people are kind of being crybabies lately. And I don't like taking shots at my player base because I actually love a ton of SVOQ players. But
Hmm.
I think a lot of people are being crybabies about the state of the metagame and things not getting banned quick enough. And I think everyone just needs to take a step back and trust the process, trust themselves, and be vocal when they feel strongly about something. And that's how we all come to understand each other and ultimately come to a balanced metagame. And I'm really excited for that.
I think that's a fantastic answer, especially what you said about Gen 8 was really interesting. 'Cause that's a tier that I think was incredibly balanced. I mean, it was a team building
Yes.
paradise, to be sure.
Yeah.
It was the kind of thing, I remember there's this one court, you can put Landorus, Ferrothorn, Slowbro, Weavile, and just any other two Pokemon, and it can kind of work. It
Within
won't be
reason,
great.
yes.
It won't be a great team, but like you can do it, and it'll be fine. And then transitioning to Generation 9, where OU's top threats are completely unanswerable, even by the bulkiest of teams, or not completely, but definitely not reliably answered. So yeah, I think the idea that Generation 9 could reach a place where innovation is rewarded and there is this stability and nuance and niches emerge seems really distant at the time. But I suppose you are right. It has it. We've had metagames in worse states before, and I'm really excited to get to that point and see how tiering progresses.
I am as uh I am as well. Um, it's just tough because, and I'm speaking from my perspective, and I pardon my tone here, but
Hmm.
I feel like we're hearing a lot of negativity right now, and I get it. But I also think a lot of people that are being negative right now haven't been around for generation 6 or 7 or even 8 necessarily, where we've been in similar positions. Maybe this is, ramped up a little bit more because of Terra and the power creep, yes, but every generation hits a point where people want X to happen, but Y happens, or people want Y to happen, and X happens, and then it leads to either disinterest or unrest or frustration, whatever
Hmm.
you want to put it. And I
Yeah.
get it. And this is just a game. It's just based off a children's game, but it's something that people care about and are passionate about, and their feelings are valid. And their passions are the most important thing to me as a councilman and a leader. In fact, I really care about that, and I sometimes even put it above my own, time, my own because that's what's important. But I just think that we'll get there. I can't promise it's going to be a team builder's paradise like Generation 8, which is a good phrase I might have to steal for my own use. But I think that I think that the seeds are starting to be planted right now, and hopefully we'll harvest in the coming months, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing what the tiering action is. And I thank you for talking with me. And thank you so much for all your fantastic work over the years managing OU. As you said, right, in retrospect, maybe not every decision was correct. But I think you guys in the council this generation and in all the past ones, I've been here around since Gen 7, I've done a really fantastic job. So good
Oh,
luck
I
with
appreciate it.
continuing.
And
And yeah, I'm
can I
excited to
just
see
add
where
one
the
thing,
tier
by the way,
goes.
before the video
Oh
ends?
yeah, yeah, absolutely, go for it.
So I just want to say, I don't care if you're a casual or a seasoned veteran, a ladder player, tour player, whatever. If you guys ever, aren't sure why something's happening in the tier, or you're not feeling, great about something, or maybe you just have a general question, you guys can always reach out to me on the forums or Discord or even Twitter. I'm not as responsive there, admittedly, but I'm happy to engage with you guys, and I think that's how we make this a better experience for everyone involved. And also, thank you so much for having me on your channel because that's an opportunity for me to reach out to you guys reach out to me, and I just think that's how everyone becomes happier, better, more enjoying, and I couldn't be more appreciative of you for having this platform and letting me be on it. So thank you so much for that.
Of course, it's my pleasure, and I'm feeling more optimistic about the metagame already.
Awesome. Me too.